We thank you also, and I am asking Mr. Slimak, isn't here, to continue with Mr.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, David, for your great presentation. You are always on the top. I know it, and now Romania know it too. And next speaker is Mr. Suman. The floor is yours.
Hey, Ovidio, thank you. I see hands up here. I don't know if that hand is up for a question to David, or you want me to continue? Because David has to leave in 20-30 minutes.
Yes, so I would like to put a question actually to Mr. Baxter, if possible.
So maybe it's a good idea to have a Q&A with David so that he can be freed.
Great. Suman, it's okay. Mr. Florin.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter, and thank you all for joining us today here. Also, thank you for the invitation, Cesar. I'm quite surprised to see every time when I'm going to such a meeting that everybody, when he's talking about PPPs and talking about all kind of developments, never includes all the institution all the way in. And you are mentioning about the big losses due to the Corona situation in 2020 and of course also in 2021. Nobody is doing a risk development for the cultural sector, which I'm coming from. And to name just a few sectors and leaving this one away, it's a shame, and it is actually a little bit to blame. And I'm not blaming anyone today here, I'm just pointing it out, of course. But risk development about what is going to happen in the coming future if no one from the private sector is going to invest in the cultural sector, and vice versa, to create some bridges between fields. I believe personally that is going to increase the lack of inspiration for any other sectors. If you want development in a sector, you have to use your imagination. If you want to use your imagination, you have to be stimulated. If you want to be stimulated, you have to look back into the history. You have to also develop the cultural side of our society. And unfortunately, that's the side of our society which is the most, or together with other ones, but it is the most let down at this very moment. And to give you just a small quotation, an average over 2020 regarding the return of a cultural person in the Netherlands, where I'm based for the past 20 years, it was lower than the garbage man. With all the respect for our garbage men, because without them we cannot build on our society. But if we can build on our society starting with the garbage man, why do not build on our society starting with creating that imagination and inspiration situation for all kinds of businesses? And creating bridges is something which everybody's talking about, but too little enterprises and far too less people are actually putting this into practice. And with that to be said, I really liked and enjoyed your presentation, Mr. Baxter, but next to the education and loss of any kind of views also on the PPPs during 2020s and 2021, and I'm telling you from experience, it's going to be the same in these sectors for the coming at least 2 years, if not more. If we are not going to think about this sector as well, then in about 5 years to 10 years, the next generation of kids is going to have such a big problem and huge issues that our generation, my generation, and your generation is not going to be able to cope anymore with the needs of the society. This is what I can say, and if you can adapt your presentation maybe in the future, or some other people gathered today here can think about this information as well and synthesize it or put it together with other information and investment plans. it would be great to communicate also on these matters in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florian. I'm glad to hear you in the Netherlands. I'm half Dutch, so goeiedag. My family comes from the Netherlands.
Ik ga dat ook in het Nederlands kunnen zeggen, maar
niemand
hier gaat ons verstaan.
Yeah. So he said we should have presented in Dutch as well, then we would have all, maybe he would have understood as well, or more people could have understood. One thing I just want to point, I'm working, as I mentioned, on a project in Saudi Arabia at the moment, the World Bank, and the cultural aspect is not being forgotten there with PPPs, because it's considered to be also very closely tied to tourism. And the culture of a country which is strong is also what forms the basis of cultural activities, which is an underlying point of tourism projects, which can lead to PPP events. I would, if you wanted, have a look at the cultural aspects under the planning that's taking place in Saudi Arabia, or you can drop me an email and I can guide you to that, but it's important. When I suppose what I will do is adjust my my slide presentation in the sense of where I have tourism as an element that rises. Often it's tourism and then dash cultural activities and leisure. So it's just, just an abbreviation for that. But it's interesting, and the cultural profile as of a country is incredibly important. So for example, in June next year, I'm going on vacation to Romania for the first time. And the reason why I'm going to Romania on vacation is because I've always been fascinated by its cultural heritage, its music, its foods, its, classical historic sites and that. So Florian, thank you for just setting me right on that. It is critically important that we don't forget the cultural sector and not let it hide behind the tourism sector.
Most welcome. And just to adapt to that, I'm currently active in Romania and the Netherlands and Germany as well. So I'm quite involved into the whole situation and development of the cultural sector during these very treacherous times. But therefore, there is need of serious thoughts coming from the private sector towards this sector as well, because without it, then it's going to be a lack of many things in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No more question. We will go with Mr. Suman from IDI, Washington, D.C., USA, with the theme COVID-19, the role and impact of public-private partnership in education. Until then, if someone has a question, we are glad to hear it. And about this concept of PPP, as Florin says, you have to have political support to go for it. In one moment, Suman, okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I think my network just dropped. I apologize for that. And good afternoon in Romania and wherever you are. And as I say, I'm going to repeat again that David mastered his Romanian and I couldn't. Apology for that. And I will just start with a comment on the last question to David. I'm from USA doing this presentation. And one of the work that we did in Nepal post-earthquake in 2015 was in tourism. And some of the work that we did was a public-private partnership, whether it was building a trail or some conservation work. So I think the private sector plays a major role. And I'm not very familiar with their work in Romania in particular, but some of the countries that we have worked, there's a very close public-private partnership we have seen, and especially anything that relates to the tourism. So with that comment, I think your question is very valid, that we cannot ignore that. And so moving forward so I'm going to focus on, and David, thanks for setting up a very good framework for my presentation. So I'm not going to be indulging too much into public-private partnership. I called David, my colleague, guru of PPP. So he did a wonderful job with that. So I'm going to focus mostly on education. So how in the education sector, and especially in digital divide in this world post-pandemic, how public-private partnership can play a major role. So next slide, please. Let me go into the presentation mode so it's easier for us flipping through it. Okay, thank you. So I'm divided into 3 sections. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the models in education sector and best practices. So I'm going to cover a couple countries briefly. And finally, I'm going to focus on how private sectors are playing, or they can play a major role in reducing digital divide. And then if you have time, if time permits, and if video allows, I'll take a few questions. Next, please. So as we know that since last year, February, March, depending on where we are, the education sector is badly hit. But the long-term impact in education is still uncertain with pandemic, and the public spending is going to be really something it is not yet discussed enough, especially on education. And looks like in post-pandemic, the funds could be diverted into health, diverted into other sector, economic recovery, and education sector is going to be badly hit. And 11% of education public expenditure is diverted to education sector right now. But looks like in post-pandemic, that may go 6%, 5% or 6%, that's the projection. So if that happens, there is no way education sector can survive or do better performance without private sector. And that's why we are already seeing a more and more engagement of private sector in education, and especially in post-pandemic. So today's presentation, I just want to focus in or around there. And these focuses are let's forget about the digital part only. Okay, so yes, right now the obvious is digital learning and etc. The equipment and infrastructure, we are focusing on that, but I think private sector has played a lot more major role than that, and they don't get as much credit as we think they should get. And the projection is, this is from OECD report, and OECD report says that with the economic pressure post-pandemic, the public expenditure will reduce to 6%. So that's 5% gap is a huge gap. And the GEMS report, I'll talk about that briefly. And GEMS report is published by the United Nations, by UNDP. And GEMS report already talking about the gap is going to be tens of billions of dollars. And they are preparing for 21-22 report. And 2020 James report, that's global education meeting report, and they evaluate a number of countries, almost all the countries. And in the James report, they already are projecting a very dangerous scenario in education. Next slide, please. Next to next, we can skip one slide. Yeah, we can skip that. Next one. So David briefly talked about the People First PPP. So in education, we can't think of something better than this. People has to be focused, and people is our future generation, is everyone, right? So focus PPPs People First PPPs focus is on quality of life and quality infrastructure investments. So one of the main goal is to reduce poverty, focus on gender equality, hunger, access to water, energy, transport, and education. But increase in terms of education, the People First PPP has to be on increasing access and promoting equity. And it has to be whatever solution that comes with, it has to be very replicable and sustainable. So we will talk about some of those sustainable program or some of those replicable program models from few countries in following slides. Next, please. So why PPP in education sector? Right? What we need to have equity in education or equality. So that gap has to be filled, and that's where we need to have more and more engagement from the private sector. And that public funding, scarce of public funding is a big challenge. And PPP model could address better access to quality education, increasing need for 21st century's technical skills, and development of higher education in all of them. And number of countries, we have seen this, especially in US, we have a number of those models. And so there are a couple of the, so private sector and public sector, that's the only two sectors people usually talk about, but there is another sector in between, and that is NGO, which is not that much talked about, but they play a really major role. And the GEMS report for 2021 is really focusing on seeing how NGO could be engaged to fill that gap in. And they are seeing NGO as a private sector. Next, please. So if you look at this one, so partnership between public-private sector is to benefit education, and that is to improve the quality of education. So we go to next. I'm trying to skip so that I'll save some time for questions. Go to next. So PPP in education can increase program efficiencies, transparency of public expenditure, improve service delivery, quicker response, overcome public sector restrictions. And that's why the private sector can play a really major role in all these 5 bullet points. Yeah. And because government has limitations, we all know that. There is no disrespect to the government, but there is a restrictions what public sector can do. And I have looked into the data of Romania because I think that's very important in this call. And in US, public sector investment, the federal government expenditure in education is a little less than 11%. Yeah. And then it comes to the state government and the local government. So every time there is education, they have to increase the taxes. And nobody likes to increase taxes. And so to make that balance, and that's where the private sector plays a very important role. And how they have done, we will talk about some of those school models, like charter school, voucher models, or BRAC model from Bangladesh, or Pratham from India, and etc. Next, please. So I mentioned about the GEMS. So Global Education Monitoring Report, the 21-22 is right now being worked on. They are collecting data, and we are also participating in this. And 2020 reports is already published in October. So this October, the 2020 report was published. So if you look at that report, they talk about few very important thing. So it's a huge report. So I just took a few bullet points from there. So providing education. So private sector, NGOs, faith-based or community schooling. Those are really important. So they're going to be a very important non-state actors. That's what they're calling it. And providing ancillary services. So they say school meals, technology, conducting assessment, supplementary tutoring. That's where they come play a very important role. And if probably many of you know, Khan Academy has really flourished in the last 15 years since they were started, I think 15, 20 years ago. And that's a very prime example. And many other companies have followed Khan Academy's path. And influencing education system, functioning and financing. So whether the equity implications or influencing other national policies, additional resource mobilizations, and then the state role in the process, regulatory frameworks or accountability mechanisms. So we have worked in a number of countries in education, and we have seen there's a huge gap between the private school and public schools. and that's where there's a very unhealthy competition in both sectors. And those countries, especially in developing countries, they really need to pay attention that how that gap can be filled. And in post-pandemic, some of the countries have done excellent work in that area because of the digital divide. And so that's why that gap has to be really filled between the private and public schools. Next, please. And again, continuing to the GEM, if you look at the GEM's report, they're really focusing on non-state actors landscape. So they have seen in a number of countries how this, especially the NGOs and private sector has played a role. So they are realizing that, if you look into the money poured into education by these World Bank or USAID or DFID and other players, that their share in education has reduced since 2008. So that we can't wait for the donor agencies to pour money in all the time, and those are not free money for the countries. So it's the country's policies has responsibilities to engage private sector in their education. And can we go to the next one, please? So if you look, the key actors are public, private, and NGOs, and so we'll talk about this modality, how these public sectors, private sectors, and NGOs can work together in education. Next. So if you look at the modality, so if you look at the PPP modality in education, we'll see that often government uses tax revenue to provide capital from investment, joint operations with private sector or under contract. So we have a model where we give it out to the private sector. So, or we give them under contract. So second one is capital investment made by private sector on the strength of contract and government to provide a great service. So they could be built to operate, built to transfer, or they could be any of those 2 or 3 models. So those models are in the next slide. So you have seen that the schools could be given infrastructure the government could not. Can we go to the next slide, please? So government could not build the infrastructure. They couldn't build the schools. So they could do a build, operate, and transfer. And with build, operate, and transfer, where you giving everything for that private sector to run the schools, right? And so they're going to build, they're going to operate, and they're going to transfer. And once they are ready, they will transfer it to the government. And the build and transfer, this is just building the infrastructure and giving back to the government. And build, lease, and transfer, they are building it and leasing it to the government. So we have seen all 3 models working in different parts of the countries. So this has been a new trend, even in US. This has been a new trend, and in US it gets a little more political debate and ideological debate whether there should be more public investment on the public sector investment. Government should play a major role in education, or should we engage the government? So in US, it's a more political debate, but we have seen both models working. Next slide, please. So if you look in this, so there are 3 major players, right? So government, investors, and the ultimate beneficiaries are the users. So government to investors, so their government's role should be just regulatory framework, and they provide the right to provide services through procurement and whatnot. And then the investors, either they can get a grant money and they can get annuity payment, and they hand it over once that they build it, and they hand it over to the government, or the government gives it to them to run the schools. So those schools are charter schools in USA. And the charter school models have been adopted in many countries, and there is a whole political philosophy they believe that will improve the quality of education. And then the other one is the services. No matter who runs it, whether the government or the private investors, the services are provided to the end users, and they could charge some of those people. They could charge, the investor could charge the beneficiary, but often in PPP we have seen that they have not charged, but they have been investors have been compensated with grants or annuity payment. So that's been a most successfully service delivery and operation model between government investors and users. Next, please. We skip the next slide and we can go to the following one. So I'll talk about briefly these four school models. Okay. So charter schools and vouchers. So I'm not sure how many of you are very familiar with this, but charter schools and vouchers is in many ways it's a PPP model, and charter school and vouchers are getting popular in certain state and certain catchment areas in USA, and where parents or the beneficiary had choice to go outside of their catchment area for these schools, and these schools are contracted out to the private corporations. So private companies are running these schools. They have to meet the criteria, the academic criteria and other programs, other criteria framework given by the government, but they are the one who is running the schools, and they have to maintain certain quality. And we have seen the charter schools are, people get very attracted about the charter schools. I mean, often the charter schools have waiting lists, and charter schools have improved, have challenged the public schools to perform better, have challenged public schools for their existence, and many places public schools have competed with, they are competing with charter school and trying to improve themselves. And many times the government provides them a voucher. Government provides, in many states, government provides vouchers to the families, those who don't want to send it to the public school, and they can take the voucher, go to the private school or some school of their choice and admit their children, and difference they have to pay from the pocket. But there have been pretty successful stories in charter schools and voucher models. But it is, again, sometimes it's a political debate, it's an ideological debate, but there have been a very successful efforts of engaging private sector in education through charter schools and vouchers. BRAC is the largest NGO in the world, and it's based in Bangladesh. And BRAC has done amazing work. And BRAC has been now working in, I believe, 11 countries, and they have 100 million beneficiaries, 100 million. And simple, they are running very non-formal pre-primary to primary education. They're running formal schools, supporting formal schools. They are running program for adolescents. They are running free community learning centers around the world in 11 countries. And they are also running, I think they had about 700,000 beneficiaries in Bangladesh, and rest are outside Bangladesh. And Bangladesh population is so high, so it makes sense. And they are even going to the population, going to the community and running schools there. So such as boat schools, they're running schools on the boat, and they are running schools in the catchment areas, in the slums, and many other NGOs have followed the BRAC models. And so BRAC model has shown that how NGOs can partner with the government, and how they reach out is much stronger and bigger and better than the government. And they could be a very good partner to promote education and impact impact on people, and bring equity in education and provide access to education. And BRAC has been most probably talked model from NGO. And Pratham is another one. Pratham is not as large as BRAC, but Pratham has focused in education. Now they have across India. They are in US and mostly Sub-Saharan Africa and other South Asian countries. And they have a large catchment area, but their education is not just the formal, but they are also focused on formal and non-formal school education. And they are NGOs. They are, both BRAC and Pratham are very well funded right now. And if I remember, BRAC was started with the US, UK aid. I think with UK aid, they started the BRAC model. And Pratham is another one. So Pratham and BRAC has shown how the NGO can really change the landscape of education. And they even developed countries, and everyone is trying to follow. And there are a lot more studies done in these two models right now. Khan Academy. Khan Academy has gotten very, very popular with free access to education. And it has supplemented, it has not really replaced. And I'll say it has really complemented the public education, and has given a free access to people to education, to content. And when we talk about education, it's not just the building, right? So we have seen with pandemic, those buildings are sitting empty. There is no use of the buildings right now. No? So that's where the companies like Khan Academy has played major roles with providing quality content access to people who couldn't afford it otherwise. Next one, please. So can you follow one more? Can we just click on this film? It's a 1 minute. So can you click on this? I can't. Because you don't have in the presentation mode, so you may have to get a link. Yeah, sorry about it.
Most schools close their doors at the end of March in order to keep children and families and teachers safe from the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that when they did close their school buildings, they typically tried to provide some form of remote instruction, whether that was face-to-face learning or packets sent home to children. But we also know that the learning experiences the students did have were likely drastically different than what they would experience if they were in person. For example, based on our research, we know that about 12% of teachers indicated that they were able to cover all or nearly all the curriculum they would have covered if schools had remained open. Many teachers reported providing a lot of review and very little learning of new concepts. We also know that many teachers were unable to contact students or families. And of course, these issues were even bigger.
I think the volume is not very good, so we can skip it, I'll just cover this. Sorry. So this is a small video made by the RAND Corporation here in California, the think tank institute, and so this is really talking about the inequality and equity where the private sector can play a major role, and some of those are capacity building of teachers, reaching out to families, reaching out to the children who are not being reached, people who are in vulnerable situation, or people who are from marginalized population, and also the content preparation. So that's where the private sector can play a major role. And RAND has done very vast research in this area. And this is just a 1.5 minute film, so I thought it's pretty appropriate, and I had put it there. And if we do end up sharing this slide, people can watch it at their leisure time. So can we skip to the next one? So this is where I'm going to come to the last part, and this is reducing digital divide. So we're looking at post-pandemic or pandemic era right now, depending on where we are. So this is a big challenge. Until last year, February, the whole world was saying we got to be technically savvy, we got to be ahead of other people, we're competing, we got to focus more money on technology, we got to focus on technology infrastructure and everything. But now, as soon as the pandemic hit, schools started closing, and we realized I don't know about Romania, but we realized even USA was not prepared. Yeah. We thought USA was ahead of many other countries, and we were really good. We had good access to internet. People could have a good phone on their hands and access to digital device, etc., etc. But USA failed. Many schools were closed for many months, many weeks, until they provided access to every single child, access in terms of digital device, access to the infrastructure, to broadband, etc. So many schools, they didn't have a content online. So we are racing in this period right now, and this is a perfect time for inviting private sector, partnering with them, and developing the infrastructure. So if we look at this, I have categorized in 4 areas. So that's based on the RAND, that video. Quality infrastructure. So we talk about the broadband. So we'll talk about some of the numbers in a few minutes. So quality infrastructure is needed. Content development is needed. Access to digital device and service delivery. So, for example, many sub-Saharan Africa, people gave out used mobile phone. World Bank also distributed in many countries. People become very innovative in this kind of situation. The crisis makes people very innovative, right? So, content development, multiple language, content development in multiple languages. And so this has been a really big challenge, and I hope we are getting very much attention by the private sector as well as by the government, and I think this is going to be in top priority. And if not, then there has to be much work to be done in terms of policy and lobbying the government and saying, hey, private sector is not bad in education. We got to bring them in. So for example, Google, so Google Classroom, many countries are using Google Classroom, it's free. Lots of Google contents are free. And even the Facebook has invested money on education now. Everyone is investing money on education. HP has done a big project in Nigeria and Kenya, where they not just developed the content and gave access to people, but also provided digital devices. And so there are lots of examples how these private sectors are taking it very seriously. And some countries or many countries are welcoming them, but still the infrastructure, the broadband is still an issue. So this is something we can go to the next one. So broadband is still a big issue. So I'll share one of the model that I was involved recently since pandemic is the first two, public radios and TVs. So we think it's an old model, right? It's not an old model, it has come back. Right? So people can't afford infrastructure, broadband to have overnight change in any country or have access to the digital device. So these are very affordable solutions. And private sectors have played a major role. The FM stations in many countries, TV stations, etc. They have allocated education time, which seriously they are educating, because if you run the education program on the FM stations, the whole village can do it. We just had a webinar last week, and we had presenters from 4 continents. And there was a model where a number of countries, they put a loudspeaker and they ran a FM station program. The whole village was getting educated. So some of the advantage of this post-COVID and this crisis has done is more and more people, especially women and especially women from marginalized population, they are getting hold of these digital devices. They are getting digitally educated. So some of those advantages are there, and I'm yet to see. We have yet to see the implications and more studies, because some of the studies came out right 1 month after the COVID or 2 months after the COVID. But the data, there was not enough data. So I'm waiting for the GEMS report to be published in next 2 months. for 2022. And then we'll see what does 2021, 22, and we'll see what it says. And WhatsApp have played a major role. They are partnering in a number of countries to push the content. YouTube doing the same thing, pushing the content of content to families, to teachers, etc. Even the teachers were not prepared. So lots of capacity building program is going through WhatsApp and YouTube. Google is in front of most of these companies, and they are partnering with many countries and almost every single donor agency, and a number of other apps we have seen, and private and public universities are playing major role at the time of crisis for reducing the digital devices. Digital divide, and especially gender digital divide, and so we have seen the data that more male has access to digital devices than the female, right? So think about a family which had just one mobile phone in name of the digital device, and the male family takes the digital device and goes to home, goes to work, or goes to have coffee outside, goes to meet with the friends. Now, rest of the family member is without the digital device, and that's not the case in many developed countries. So how to reduce the digital device, So some of those areas providing more access to these digital devices, which are being worked by Google. I should have mentioned Facebook here. Facebook has done a tremendous job in that area. Next, please.
Mr. Suman, please, if you are so kind, it's a very interesting and a very innovative approach for PPP. We have more speakers to.
Yeah. So just I'm almost done. Okay. So can we go to the previous? I think we missed one slide. Can you just go to the previous one?
No.
So just some numbers I'm going to show you. So there are 60% of teachers have received the professional development through this innovative ways, online education training, because they were not trained to be online. So the private sector has played a major role in this. And 36%, and so there are lots of work has been done by the private sector in partnership with the government. So next one, just quickly I'll go. So AT&T, the AT&T is right now serving 10 million of students to provide free hotspots, data plans, and partnership with nonprofit Connected Nations. And so that's another approach to partner with these companies. Next one is T-Mobile, and T-Mobile has done the similar thing since February 2020, 1.6 million students, and a project has 10 million target for 10.7 billion initiative for the wireless hotspots. And the last but not least is the Verizon. So Verizon has, in US, Verizon has done amazing job by providing 38 million students across 40 states and DC hotspots and access to the broadband. And last slide, I'll just go to the last one. And this one is, there are many, I've already covered many remote learning resources, such as radio, television, and they have played major role. And so this is the time where we have to be innovative, and private sector has to play a major role, and public sector has to be very open-minded about how we can give a little more credit to private sector than they have gotten in field of education, in access to education, in access to delivering quality education. So having said that, I will just stop here, Ovidio. And if you have any questions, I will take it. I have shared my email address in the chat window to everyone. So I'm accessible through Ovidio, or you can directly email me. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timsina. But being so late, and because one of our speakers has to leave in a certain hour, I propose to renounce now to the questions. And if there are other ideas, I have to pass to the next speaker.
Yes, we have next speaker, Mr. Ionuț Nache, with the theme IFS Standard, Contribution to the Development of Local Markets. And I know that Mr. Ionuț is a little bit German style, and he will go briefly.
Scopul prezentării mele, în urma discuției cu organizatorii, este acela de a oferi cât mai multă informație și know-how în materie de lobby antreprenorilor, motiv pentru care, pornind de la cadrul academic pe care îl studiez în zona lobby-ului în cadrul unui program de cercetare postdoctorală la SNSPA, am încercat să conturez această prezentare. Voi încerca să fiu rapidă și să mă focusez mai mult pe zona practică decât pe cea teoretică. Slide-ul numărul 2, vă rog frumos. Vom analiza lobby-ul ca instituție publică și prin acest termen spunem că, de fapt, lobby-ul... Slide-ul următor, da, am sărit peste introducere. Spunem că, de fapt, lobby-ul este o instituție publică care depinde de actorii care sunt jucători în scena lobby-ului. Slide-ul numărul 3, vă rog. Încerc să fiu mai rapidă, să recuperez din timp. Deci, spațiul public al lobby-ului este cel în care găsim scopul lobby-ului și actorul de lobby. Actorul este important din punctul de vedere al moralității și din punct de vedere teoretic el poate fi individual sau colectiv. Se caracterizează printr-un comportament și o alegere în cadrul unei strategii care are ca scop influențarea strategiei. Actorii sunt de mai multe tipuri. Ce ne interesează pe noi în această prezentare este actorul care este antreprenor și felul în care el va fi reprezentat. Dar pentru că vorbim despre antreprenoriat, aș vrea să scot în evidență faptul că activitatea de lobby este o activitate economică care are ca scop influențarea deciziei politice și de aceea costul este un criteriu de transparență al lobby-ului și este un instrument anticorupție, exact așa cum l-a declarat și OECD. OECD, în principiile sale de transparență și integritate în lobby, a definit lobby-ul ca fiind un instrument pentru construcția unui cadru de deschidere, acces, transparență, construcția unei integrități culturale în mecanismele de implementare efectivă și conformă a unor planuri politice. Mergem mai departe la slide-ul 4, vă rog frumos. Slide-ul 4, unde am încercat un pic să intru în zona antreprenorială. Cine reprezintă într-o acțiune de lobby antreprenorul? Vorbim despre grupuri specializate și alți actori care pot fi asimilați grupurilor, iar grupurile specializate sunt definite chiar de către legislație, așa cum le-am pus aici, fie în personalități juridice, sub formă de asociații, fundații, federații, organizații care sunt dedicate diverselor scopuri religioase, cultelor. Apoi ajungem la organizațiile sindicale și cele patronale sau pot fi și ONG-uri de tipul camerelor de comerț, chiar și administrațiile publice locale sunt actori în activitatea de lobby și orice alte tipuri de organizații legal constituite. Nu excludem însă persoane fizice autorizate, întreprinderi individuale, întreprinderi de familie, cabinete individuale, pentru că veți vedea că, de fapt, acțiunea de lobby este un instrument al democrației participative care este la îndemâna oricui, pornind de la un cetățean până la o organizație reprezentată la nivel național sau internațional. Cui se poate adresa antreprenorul în acțiunea de lobby? Se poate adresa guvernului pentru dialogul cu decidenții pe care i-am definit aici. Se poate adresa direct Parlamentului cu focusare spre comisiile permanente și spre grupurile parlamentare, autorităților administrației locale și, evident, Comisiei Europene. Slide-ul următor, vă rog. Slide-ul următor. Care sunt instrumentele legale pe care le poate folosi antreprenorul? La nivelul guvernului vorbim despre registrul RUTI, care este definit în Strategia Națională Anticorupție pentru perioada 2016-2020 ca măsură de prevenție împotriva corupției și care sprijină creșterea transparenței instituționale a proceselor decizionale. RUTI, însă, atenție, nu înlocuiește mecanismele de consultare cu publicul larg definite prin legea transparenței decizionale, ci este un instrument de dialog direct, prin care cabinetele miniștrilor, ale decidenților, transparentizează public pe site-ul RUTI, v-am dat adresa www.ruti.gov.ro, transparentizează agenda lor și informații despre grupurile de interese cu care s-au întâlnit sau cu care se vor întâlni. Deci, dacă aveți programat o întâlnire cu un ministru din cabinet, via RUTI vă puteți înscrie și veți apărea acolo în arhivă cu titlul de vizită, la cine, când, fără însă a se înscrie tema discuției. La nivelul Parlamentului, slide-ul următor, vorbim despre acele sisteme informatice ale celor două camere care transparentizează în timp real agenda tuturor comisiilor și nu doar agenda, ci și rezultatul comisiilor. Este pur și simplu un click, urmărește procedura legislativă la Camera Deputaților și la Senat și se poate afla foarte ușor care este atât lista proiectelor legislative intrate pe procedură legislativă, cât și rezultatul dezbaterilor în comisii. Pornind de la aceste informații, poți să te adresezi direct via grupul parlamentar sau via parlamentarul din regiunea în care activezi pentru a interveni cu amendamente, cu propuneri de amendamente, evident, care să fie preluate în mod obligatoriu de un parlamentar și duse mai departe în comisie pentru dezbateri și ulterior în plen. La nivelul Comisiei Europene. De ce ne-am adresat la nivelul Comisiei Europene? Există fie soluția de a urmări procedura legislativă la nivelul Comisiei Europene și a fi activ în consultare pe directive atunci când ele se construiesc, lucru care se poate face și aici la noi, ideea de a interveni ex ante, nu doar după ce s-a votat o lege, fie accesezi Comisia Europeană în baza unei proceduri de control post ante. Și o să ajungem și la această procedură. Slide-ul următor. Vă rog frumos. Vorbește despre cadrul de reglementare și în Uniunea Europeană, unde s-a implementat modelul social european, suntem recunoscuți prin dialog social ca interlocutori sociali. Mai există și acest drept la petiție și inițiativa 1 milion de cetățeni pentru generarea unei directive sau a unui regulament și, evident, procedura de infringement în baza articolului 258, care merge fie la nivelul Comisiei Europene, fie, dacă nu are succes, la Curtea Europeană de Justiție. Cum poți să accesezi Comisia Europeană prin Registrul Transparenței, care este un registru al lobbyiștilor, indiferent cum sunt ei definiți, și unde înscrierea se face voluntar, dar odată ce ai decis să te înscrii, trebuie să transparentizezi lista clienților pentru care faci lobby la nivelul Comisiei Europene, zonele de interes pe comisii, pe directorate ale Comisiei Europene și estimări bugetare anuale legate de proiectele pe care le promovezi pe lângă directoratele Comisiei Europene. Activitatea însă în Tratatul de Funcționare al Uniunii Europene nu este recunoscută cu titlul de lobby, ci ca relații publice și consultanță, spre deosebire de Statele Unite, unde vorbim despre lobby pur și unde există un registru de lobby care devine obligatoriu în transparentizarea activității în momentul în care existi ca lobbyist din toate punctele de vedere, ca înregistrare legală și ca activitate. În România, cadrul de reglementare îl cunoașteți, nu avem o lege a lobby-ului și aceasta pentru că în continuare unii preferă să spună că lobby-ul este trafic de influență și dincolo de registrul RUTI despre care tocmai am povestit, avem ca instrumente legea dialogului social și legea privind transparența decizională în administrația publică. Ce e important este să vedem legea dialogului social, slide-ul următor, care tocmai a fost completată și care definește foarte clar dialogul social, partenerii sociali, noțiunea termenul de consultare, negocierea colectivă, dialogul social bipartit, tripartit și zona de reprezentativitate. Iar termenul de reprezentativitate este foarte important aici. Slide-ul următor, vă rog frumos. Vom reveni la reprezentativitate. Acum am să trec foarte rapid și prin aceste câteva slide-uri de abordare teoretică. De ce? Pentru că practic vrem să facem lobby. Tot practic ne e frică să facem lobby pentru că este tratat în percepția majoritară, cel puțin așa se merge ca și abordare, ca fiind trafic de influență și atunci în mediul academic se consideră că este cazul să construim o cultură despre ce este lobby-ul și unde este locul acestuia. Din punctul de vedere al abordării teoretice, lobby-ul se regăsește în științele politice, la nivelul teoriei alegerii raționale și în aplicația ale ei, cum este teoria jocului, teoria raționalității, dilema prizonierului. La noi în țară este abordarea evoluționistă a lui Miroiu, care recunoaște în cadrul teoriei alegerii raționale categoriile de actori raționali care pot acționa fie individual, fie prin alegeri colective și care întotdeauna fac apelul la alegeri și preferințe. Slide-ul următor, vă rog frumos. N-am să insist aici ca metodă de cercetare și analiză, nu vreau să plictisesc cu zona teoretică, dar pentru că am mers pe metoda chestionarului și analiză comparativă și calitativă, am să trec direct la slide-ul 12, vă rog frumos, ca să analizăm un pic rezultatele acestui chestionar cu 13 întrebări. N-am venit cu absolut toate rezultatele la întrebări, dar la una dintre întrebări, care credeți că sunt actorii acțiunii colective de lobby, iar întrebările au fost puse atât în mediul decidenților, înțelegând prin aceasta reprezentanți ai guvernului la nivel de ministru, secretar de stat și membri ai Parlamentului, și aceleași întrebări puse mediului de afaceri organizat asociativ, deci la nivel de patronate și organizații profesionale, asociații profesionale, avem un răspuns care pe mine cel puțin mă bucură și anume faptul că actorii acțiunii colective de lobby sunt recunoscuți în proporție majoritară de ambele categorii de respondenți, ca fiind asociațiile profesionale, patronatele și firmele de lobby specializate. La întrebarea care credeți că sunt efectele acțiunii de lobby, răspunsurile le vedeți înșiruite în prima coloană. Am văzut o majoritate din partea mediului de afaceri care a răspuns că acțiunea de lobby poate aduce o îmbunătățire a legislației cu scop social, în interes privat, dar și în promovarea bunelor practici. Iar la capitolul promovarea bunelor practici, inclusiv decidenții au fost de acord în majoritate de 68% cu au avut această opinie. Slide-ul 13, vă rog. Slide-ul 13. La întrebarea care credeți că este nivelul decizional accesibil lobbyistului, și revin, lobbyistul este actorul pe care l-am identificat deja, inclusiv antreprenorul organizat la nivel reprezentativ, răspunsul a fost majoritar atât din punctul de vedere al decidenților, cât și din punctul de vedere al mediului de afaceri, la orice nivel necesar. Ceea ce este interesant de observat este faptul că decidenții au votat în proporție mai mare pentru acest nivel, orice nivel necesar, decât mediul de afaceri, de unde percepția decidenților este că se poate mai mult prin lobby și ei sunt deschiși pentru această activitate, pe când mediul de afaceri este mai puțin optimist la acest capitol. Am aici, la următorul slide, slide-ul 14, un studiu de caz. Este vorba despre folosirea lobby-ului ca instrument în armonizarea directivei TVA și am ajuns la pasul numit procedura de infringement. Procedura de infringement este un instrument de control post-ante oferit de Tratatul de Funcționare al Uniunii Europene, atunci când Comisia Europeană intervine în negociere directă la nivelul guvernului pentru a repara un text de directivă care nu a fost amendat corect și care contravine principiilor directivei. Evident, ca antreprenor organizat asociativ și reprezentat ca lobbyist, nu ajungi să faci pasul spre infringement decât atunci când pașii la nivel local, încercarea unei corecții în dialog direct cu autoritatea de resort din România, au eșuat. Iar încercarea unei corecții în dialog direct cu autoritatea de resort din România înseamnă, de fapt, pregătirea unui dosar care este stufos, cu studiu de impact, cu dovada tuturor întâlnirilor, a pașilor la nivel justițiar local care au eșuat. În acest caz a fost vorba despre un articol din codul fiscal care obliga societățile de leasing să plătească TVA pentru bunurile nereposedate. Adică societățile de leasing nu dețineau aceste bunuri, dar erau obligate să plătească TVA-ul aferent unor bunuri pe care nu le dețineau. Evident că la nivel local s-a refuzat orice dialog, pentru că era vorba despre sume mari și, într-un final, s-a ajuns la nivelul Comisiei Europene, care a reușit în dialog direct cu Comisia Europeană, în baza articolului 258 din Tratatul de Funcționare al Uniunii Europene, deci deschizând un dosar de infringement, să convingă Ministerul de Finanțe să corecteze textul codului fiscal prin armonizare cu directiva europeană TVA. Dacă nu s-ar fi ajuns la această negociere directă între Comisia Europeană și Guvernul României, pasul următor care urma era inițierea procedurii judiciare la nivelul Curții Europene de Justiție, Pas pe care îl face Comisia Europeană și nu trebuie să-l faceți dumneavoastră ca antreprenori. Pentru că la momentul în care un dosar este recunoscut de către Comisia Europeană pe procedura de infringement, deci practic este o plângere în care Comisia consideră că are la dispoziție absolut toate informațiile necesare, este o plângere completă. Comisia este obligată pe procedură să facă toate procedurile până la corectarea textului local la nivelul guvernului care a încălcat directiva. Ea preia practic cazul antreprenorilor din România. Din punct de vedere teoretic, revin, suntem într-un cadru normativ al teoriei integrării instituționalism, vorbim despre instituționalismul la nivelul Federației Europene, iar rezultatul în acest caz, ca și încadrare teoretică, este un echilibru Pareto, acel echilibru 80-20, în care întotdeauna 20% din populația globului este cea care creează 80% din venituri. Este definiția echilibrului Pareto. Slide-ul următor, vă rog frumos. Pentru că am abordat și teoretic, aici avem concluziile și recomandările teoretice, faptul că lobby-ul este recunoscut din punct de vedere teoretic ca fiind parte din teoria alegerii raționale la nivelul științelor politice, că are niște criterii de care depinde foarte mult în analiza calității acțiunii de lobby, factorul etic, moral, definirea costului, a scopului, strategiile comportamentale ale actorilor implicați. Și evident de aici se naște necesitatea unei reglementări adecvate a lobby-ului în România, care să servească combaterii corupției și creșterii transparenței și evident să definească activitatea de lobby și lobbyistul în sine. Slide-ul următor, o altă confirmare a cercetării este faptul că lobby-ul nu este trafic de influență. Traficul de influență este definit în codul penal, pe când lobby-ul nu se regăsește acolo. Faptul că practici promisiuni de dare de bani sau alte foloase pentru a genera trafic de influență, aceasta nu înseamnă că practici activitatea de lobby. Diferența de încadrare juridică între cele două este buna credință din codul civil și opinia mea, necesitatea reglementării acestei activități în România. Slide-ul următor, vă rog. Niște recomandări pentru antreprenori, am îndrăznit, nu cunosc audiența și îmi cer scuze dacă este prea simplist ceea ce am pus în aceste ultime două slide-uri. Revin cu ideea, lobby-ul nu este interzis de lege, deci aveți încredere să-l folosiți, pentru că el este deja practicat în România și în Uniunea Europeană prin aplicarea principiului transparenței și al subsidiarității, mai ales principiul subsidiarității este cel care sprijină activitatea de lobby ca fiind parte din democrația participativă. Da, lobby-ul este un instrument al democrației participative și poate fi folosit pentru diverse scopuri. PPP, parteneriatul PPP este un exemplu de succes în activitatea de lobby. Recomand antreprenorilor să se organizeze în asociații profesionale pentru că acestea le oferă cadrul de reprezentativitate cerut de către legislație, le oferă un parteneriat bazat pe încredere, acces la studii de piață, studii de impact, informații esențiale proiectului și, evident, know-how în construcția celor mai bune soluții, atât pentru industrie cât și la nivelul economiei și social. cu titlu de exemplu, atunci când pregătim un dosar de infringement către Comisia Europeană, acest dosar de infringement nu trebuie să fie doar o plângere, nu trebuie să meargă doar cu o plângere care să prezinte impactul nearmonizării directivei la nivel național. Trebuie să vină și cu propuneri de înlocuire a textului care nu este corect și cu impact asupra ce aduce această înlocuire, această corectare a textului, nu doar pentru industria care depune plângerea, ci și la nivel social și la nivel macroeconomic. Fiți prezenți întotdeauna în dialogul social al construcției legislative și încercați să vă construiți legislația și să vă faceți auziți, să vă transmiteți opinia, mesajele și nevoile înainte ca legea să fie aprobată în Parlament. De aceea este bine să fiți reprezentați în CES, să fiți prezenți în agenda parlamentară și dacă nu puteți să o faceți direct, angajați lobiști specializați. Iar sfatul meu este să folosiți comunicarea în presă doar atunci când dialogul social, dialogul direct cu autoritățile de resort eșuează. Următorul slide, vă rog frumos. Despre colaborarea organizațională, câteva idei aici. Ce anume este foarte important atunci când o organizație antreprenorială construiește un dosar, un proiect de lobby, foarte important este calitatea informației și felul în care aceasta circulă. De regulă se construiește totul pe această paradigmă need to know, pentru că, așa cum v-am spus, dosarul trebuie să vină întotdeauna cu informații de bază, dar există întotdeauna constrângeri la nivelul membrilor organizației care definesc diferit informația esențială. Și de aici trebuie foarte bine definit ce anume este informație esențială, pentru că sunt acele informații de tip strategic pe care membrii unei organizații de obicei refuză să le transparentizeze, sau acele informații care țin de fapte esențiale pentru întărirea colaborării, de informații ce țin de funcționalitatea proiectului de lobby și pe care, de asemenea, unii membri ai organizației le consideră de nivel secundar, motiv pentru care nu le transparentizează. Este bine să înțelegeți că este imposibil ca cineva să aibă succes individual în absența sau în dauna succesului colectiv atunci când sunteți organizați la nivel asociativ și porniți la drum pe un proiect comun, că un sistem care depinde de colaborarea membrilor, dar care răsplătește rezultatul individual, întotdeauna va eșua în mediocritate, și că reprezentarea trebuie să permită un grad suficient de autonomie despre mandatul lobbyistului, un lucru foarte important. Lobbyistul trebuie să poată reacționa la momentul oportun în cadrul negocierilor, altfel un mandat limitativ, lipsit de autoritate, fără ca acesta să se poată angaja în discuție și în negociere, indiferent de câte resurse financiare și umane și cât know-how este pus la mijloc, nu va ajuta lobbyistul să vă reprezinte până la punctul final, care este succesul proiectului. Ultimul slide cu mulțumirile mele.